I never believed in love at first sight until that October evening in downtown Omaha. The autumn air carried promises of change as I pushed through the glass doors of the Meridian Gallery, my calloused fingers still smelling of wood polish and bowstring wax. The place buzzed with pretentious chatter and clinking wine glasses. I hate these events, but my friend insisted I needed to get out more. You can't spend every night in that workshop, Marina, she'd said. Maybe she was right. That's when I saw it. The painting dominated the far wall like a war cry, fragments of time, broken arrows scattered across canvas, their fletching torn and shafts splintered. Pages of text swirled around them, words bleeding into watercolor chaos. My breath caught. Someone understood the beauty in destruction, in starting over. It speaks to you, too. I turned. A woman stood beside me, brunette hair catching gallery lights, green eyes fixed on the same canvas. Something electric passed between us. Not attraction exactly. Recognition. The arrows. I pointed at the painting. They're not broken. They're being reborn. She smiled, revealing a dimple on her left cheek. I was thinking about the words, scattered but still forming stories. You're a writer? Trying to be. Sydney Rivera. She extended her hand, soft skin, firm grip. Marina Williams. I make bows. Traditional archery equipment. Sydney's eyes widened. Like the ones in the painting? Exactly like those. We stood in comfortable silence, studying the artwork. The crowd moved around us like water around stones. I felt oddly protective of this moment, this shared understanding with a stranger. Coffee sometime? The words escaped before I could stop them. I mean, if you want to discuss art, or arrows, or writing. Sydney's laugh was musical. I'd like that. Fair warning though, my memory's been unreliable lately. Car accident 6 months ago. Sometimes I forget conversations entirely. Then we'll have to make them memorable. She pulled out her phone. Number? As I recited the digits, our fingers brushed when she handed me her business card. Mystery writer, it read. How fitting. Thursday, Riverside Cafe, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Sydney started to leave, then turned back. Marina? That painting. Do you think broken things can become beautiful again? The vulnerability in her voice made my chest tighten. I believe they become more beautiful. All the best bows have been broken at least once. Her smile lit up her entire face. I watched her disappear into the crowd, already counting hours until Thursday. When I looked back at the painting, those scattered arrows seemed to be pointing toward something hopeful. I stayed until closing, memorizing every brushstroke. The gallery owner mentioned the artist died recently, leaving behind only this one piece. Like she'd poured her entire soul into those fragments, trusting someone would understand. Walking to my truck, autumn leaves crunching underfoot, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully ordered life had just shifted off its axis. Sydney Rivera, mystery writer with unreliable memory. Something told me she was going to be anything but forgettable. The workshop felt different when I returned home. My half-finished bows lined the walls like sleeping sentries, waiting for completion. I picked up my current project, running fingers along the smooth yew wood. Tomorrow I'd continue shaping it, but tonight belonged to possibility. Thursday arrived like Christmas morning. I reached Riverside Cafe 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table with perfect sight lines to the entrance. My hands wouldn't stop moving, adjusting napkins, checking my phone, smoothing my blonde hair. When Sydney walked in, my heart performed some ridiculous gymnastics routine. She wore a burgundy sweater that matched the autumn leaves outside, those green eyes scanning the room until they found mine. Her smile could have powered the entire cafe. You came, she said, sliding into the opposite chair. Did you think I wouldn't? My brain's been playing tricks lately. Sometimes I dream entire conversations that never happened. I reached into my jacket pocket. Then let's make this real. I placed a miniature bow on the table, barely 3 inches long, carved from cherry wood, made it for someone who appreciates broken arrows. Sydney's fingers traced the tiny weapon with reverence. It's perfect. How do you even carve something this small? Same way you write stories. One word at a time. Her laugh was infectious. We ordered coffee and fell into easy conversation. She told me about her apartment walls covered in sticky notes, Fragments of memories, story ideas, random thoughts she couldn't trust her damaged mind to remember. Sounds overwhelming, I said. Terrifying. Sometimes I wake up and don't recognize my own handwriting. The vulnerability in her admission made my chest ache. Want help organizing them? Sydney's eyes brightened. You'd do that? You barely know me. I know enough. After coffee, we walked to her apartment 3 blocks away. She wasn't kidding about the sticky notes. They covered every wall like yellow snow, hundreds of fragments creating a paper blizzard of half-formed thoughts. Welcome to my beautiful mind, Sydney said sarcastically. I stood in the center of her living room, slowly turning. Each note told part of a story, character names, plot points, emotional observations. It was chaos, but organized chaos, like looking at the inside of a creative tornado. It's not insane, I said. It's impressive. Sydney stepped closer, studying my face. You're not just being nice? When have I been just nice? Our eyes locked. The air between us shifted, charged with something electric. Sydney's hand rose to touch my cheek, her thumb tracing my jawline. Time stopped existing. Marina, she whispered. I leaned down, capturing her lips with mine. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as she pressed against me. Her mouth tasted like coffee and promises. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. That felt like remembering something important, she murmured. What do you remember? That I want to do it again. We spent the evening sorting her notes into categories: romance plots, character studies, random observations. Sydney curled against my side on her couch, reading fragments aloud while I ran fingers through her silky hair. Listen to this one, she said, holding up a blue note. Woman teaches woman to shoot arrows. Both hit unexpected targets. When did you write that? No idea. Maybe I'm psychic. Saturday afternoon found us at my workshop on the outskirts of town. Sydney gasped when she saw the space. High ceilings, wooden workbenches covered in tools, dozens of bows in various stages of completion hanging from wall pegs like musical instruments waiting to be played. This is your sanctuary, she said. Now it's ours. I selected a recurve bow, testing its draw weight before handing it to Sydney. Ready for your first lesson? Her initial attempts were disasters. Arrows sailed wide, embedding in hay bales or disappearing entirely into the surrounding trees. But she listened intently, adjusting her stance and grip according to my instructions. Breathe out slowly, I coached, standing behind her, my hands guiding her arms. Feel the bow become part of you. Her third shot hit the outer ring of the target. Sydney jumped up and down like she'd won Olympic gold. I did it. Did you see that? Her excitement was contagious. I grabbed her waist, spinning her around until we both collapsed in laughter. When I set her down, she was still in my arms, face flushed with victory and something deeper. Thank you, she whispered. For what? Making me feel whole. This kiss was different, hungrier, more desperate. Her hands tangled in my hair as we pressed against each other, months of loneliness melting away in shared warmth. The workshop faded around us until only this moment existed, 2 women discovering something neither expected to find. 3 weeks into whatever Sydney and I were becoming, reality crashed through my workshop door wearing designer heels and a knowing smile. Holly Nelson, Sydney's editor, stood in my doorway like judgment personified. Marina Williams? Her voice carried Manhattan polish that made my flannel shirt feel inadequate. We need to talk. I set down the bow I'd been sanding. About Sydney? About what you don't know. Holly's sharp blue eyes scanned my workspace with barely concealed disdain. Sydney never mentioned Rebecca Torres? The name hit like a physical blow. Should she have? Her girlfriend of 4 years. The one Sydney left 3 days before the accident. My workshop suddenly felt too small, oxygen too thin. She never said anything about... Because she doesn't remember. Convenient, isn't it? Holly crossed her arms. Rebecca's been calling me for months. She wants Sydney back. Sydney's with me now. Holly's laugh was razor sharp. Honey, you're a rebound she doesn't even know she's rebounding from. The words stung because they carried the weight of possibility. Sydney's amnesia had conveniently erased an entire relationship. What else had it erased? Promises made? Futures planned? A love that might still be waiting? That evening, Sydney arrived at my apartment carrying takeout containers and wearing that smile that made my world tilt sideways. She'd been staying over more nights than not, her clothes slowly colonizing my closet. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, unpacking Thai food on my kitchen counter. "Holly stopped by today." Sydney's hands stilled. What did she want? To tell me about Rebecca. The color drained from Sydney's face. She gripped the counter like it might steady her spinning world. "Rebecca. You remember her?" Flashes. Dark hair, laugh like breaking glass. Someone who made decisions for me. Sydney's voice grew distant. "She feels like a storm I barely escaped." I moved closer, some protective instinct overriding my own insecurities. What kind of decisions? Where we lived, what I wrote, who I could see. Sydney's green eyes met mine. "Holly thinks I should remember everything." "What do you think?" "I think some things are forgotten for good reasons." We ate in contemplative silence, but something had shifted between us. The specter of Rebecca Torres now occupied space in my small apartment, uninvited but undeniable. Later, as Sydney curled against me in bed, she traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. "Marina? What if remembering changes everything between us? Do you want to remember?" Part of me is terrified too. Another part feels like I'm living someone else's life. I tightened my arms around her. "This is your life. Right now. With me." But even as I said it, doubt crept through my defenses like winter cold. How could I compete with 4 years of history I knew nothing about? The next morning brought another unwelcome visitor. I was testing a new bowstring when my phone buzzed with Sydney's ringtone. Her voice sounded shaky. "Marina. There's someone here. A woman who says she knows me." My blood turned to ice water. "Where are you?" "My apartment. She has keys. Photos of us together." "Marina. I don't remember her, but my body does." When she touched my hand, I almost collapsed. "Rebecca Torres." The name tasted bitter in my mouth. "I'm coming over." "No, wait. She wants to talk to me alone." "Help me remember." "Sydney, I need to know who I was, even if it changes who I am." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, jealousy and fear warring in my chest. Outside, November wind rattled my workshop windows like ghost fingers scratching to get in. For 3 days, Sydney didn't call. I threw myself into work, crafting bows with obsessive precision while imagining worst-case scenarios. Every ring of my phone sent my heart racing, but it was never her voice on the other end. When Sydney finally appeared at my workshop, she looked haunted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually vibrant presence seemed dimmed. "She showed me photo albums," Sydney said without preamble. "Trips we took. An apartment we shared in Portland. Love letters I wrote her." I forced my voice steady. "Do you remember now?" "Some. Enough to understand why I left." Sydney stepped closer, her hands finding mine. She was controlling Marina, made me doubt every instinct, every creative choice. I felt like I was disappearing. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt for feeling relieved. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm not the same person who loved her. The accident changed me, but maybe it also freed me." Sydney's eyes searched mine. "I choose this life. I choose you." I pulled her against me, breathing in her familiar scent of vanilla and possibility. "Are you sure?" The woman in those photos looked trapped. I may not remember everything about her, but I know I never want to feel that way again. We held each other in the dusty afternoon light filtering through my workshop windows. Rebecca Torres might have history with Sydney, but we were writing the future. One kiss, one shared moment, one carefully crafted choice at a time. The love letters changed everything. Sydney found them tucked inside a cookbook she'd never remember purchasing, written in her own handwriting to Rebecca. Words of devotion that made my stomach clench with jealousy I had no right to feel. "Listen to this," Sydney said, sitting cross-legged on my workshop floor while I pretended to focus on bow maintenance. "I dream of you every night. You're the missing piece I never knew I needed." I gripped the sandpaper tighter. "Why are you reading those?" because they're clues to who I was. And Marina, I'm scared. The vulnerability in her voice made me look up. Sydney held one of the letters against her chest like it might reveal its secrets through osmosis. Scared of what? That I loved her more than I love you. That what we have is just confusion masquerading as connection. Tears gathered in those green eyes I'd grown to worship. What if I'm using you to avoid dealing with real feelings? The question hung between us like smoke. I set down my tools, moving to sit beside her on the concrete floor. My workshop had become our safe haven, but today it felt like a courtroom. Do you feel like you're using me? I asked. I feel like I'm drowning in someone else's emotions. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sydney lay curled against my side, but her breathing told me she was equally awake. The love letters sat on my nightstand like accusations. How could I compete with passionate declarations written in her own hand? At 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and padded to my kitchen. Moonlight streamed through windows, casting everything in silver uncertainty. I was pouring whiskey when Sydney appeared in the doorway, wearing my oversized workshop shirt. Can't sleep either? Keep thinking about those letters. I took a sip, liquid fire burning away some of the hurt. You loved her completely. Sydney leaned against the doorframe. I loved the idea of her. There's a difference. Is there? With Rebecca, I was trying to become someone worthy of love. With you, I already am. Before I could respond, she crossed the kitchen and kissed me with desperate hunger. Her mouth tasted like toothpaste and tears. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to mine. Don't give up on us because of words I wrote to someone else. I won't, if you won't. The next few days felt like walking on eggshells. Sydney grew distant, lost in memories I couldn't access. She'd start sentences about Rebecca, then stop mid-word, shaking her head like clearing cobwebs. The uncertainty was killing both of us. That's when I decided to create something permanent. Something that would anchor Sydney to our present instead of dragging her into the past. I selected my finest piece of yew wood, seasoned for 3 years until it sang when tapped. For 18 hours straight, I worked. My hands knew this wood intimately, coaxing curves and strength from its grain. This wouldn't be just any bow. This would be Sydney's bow, crafted specifically for her draw length, her strength, her essence. When she arrived Monday evening, I was putting finishing touches on the grip wrapping. Sydney stopped dead in the doorway, eyes wide with recognition. You made that for me. Happy early Christmas. I held up the recurved bow, its golden wood gleaming under workshop lights. Read the inscription. Sydney stepped closer, squinting at the tiny words I'd burned into the wood just above the grip. For new beginnings, from your Marina. Your Marina? She looked up with something like wonder. If you want me to be. Sydney took the bow with reverence, testing its weight and balance. When she drew it back, the wood flexed perfectly, designed for her body, her stance, her dreams. It was beautiful and deadly and completely hers. It's perfect, she whispered. So are you. This kiss was different from all the others. Deeper, more certain. Sydney pressed the bow carefully against my workbench before pulling me closer, her hands tangling in my hair with new urgency. I love you, she said against my lips. Not the memory of love, not the idea of love. You, even with all the uncertainty, especially because of it. We're writing our story from scratch, Marina. No one else gets to dictate how it ends. I picked up the bow, placing it in her hands again. Then let's practice. We moved to my makeshift range behind the workshop. Under stars that had witnessed countless love stories, Sydney drew the bow I'd made for her. Her arrow flew straight and true, embedding dead center in the target. Bullseye, I said. Sydney turned to me, bow still in her hands, face radiant with victory and something deeper. Think I'm finally aiming at the right target. I kissed her again, tasting triumph and promise. Rebecca's letters might document old love, but this moment belonged entirely to us. New beginnings, carved in yew wood and sealed with arrows that found their mark. The past could keep its secrets. We were building something stronger, a love that didn't need memory to sustain it, only courage to keep choosing each other, one shot at a time. The elevator lurched to a stop between the 9th and 10th floors of the Morrison building. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in amber shadows. Sydney pressed the alarm button repeatedly while I tried my phone. "No signal," I said, showing her the blank bars. "Emergency phone doesn't work either." Sydney slumped against the elevator wall. "How long do you think we'll be stuck?" The building directory meeting had run late, some tedious discussion about leasing rates for my potential downtown workshop space. Sydney had insisted on coming along for moral support. Now we were trapped in a metal box with nothing but time and each other. "Could be hours. Building management company sucks," I said, settling beside her on the elevator floor. "Good thing I like your company." Sydney's laugh echoed in the small space. "At least we're not strangers." "Would you rather be stuck with a stranger?" "Hell no. Then I'd have to explain why I carry around sticky notes and can't remember my own birthday." The darkness pressed around us like a living thing. After trying the emergency phone again with no luck, we resigned ourselves to waiting. The building was nearly empty on a Thursday evening. Who knew when someone would notice the broken elevator? "Tell me something I don't know about you," Sydney said, her voice softer in the enclosed space. "I'm terrified of commitment." The admission surprised even me. Sydney's head turned toward my voice. "Why?" "My last relationship ended badly. Sarah wanted marriage, kids, white picket fence. When I couldn't give her that timeline, she left." I picked at the elevator carpet, said I was emotionally unavailable. "Are you?" "I thought so. Until you." Sydney's hand found mine in the darkness, her fingers interlaced with mine, warm and reassuring. "What changed?" "You make me want things I thought I'd given up on." "Like what?" "Like tomorrow, and the day after that, and maybe forever." Sydney squeezed my hand. "That's terrifying." "Yeah." We sat in comfortable silence, sharing confessions the darkness made easier. Sydney told me about panic attacks after her accident, how she'd wake up not recognizing her own apartment. I shared my fear that she'd eventually recover all her memories and realize I was just a rebound distraction. "Marina," Sydney said eventually, "I need to tell you something about Rebecca." My stomach clenched. "What?" "I remembered more yesterday. Why I left her." Sydney's voice grew smaller. She hit me. Not often, just when she'd been drinking, and I wouldn't agree with her about my writing. Rage flooded through me so fierce I had to bite my tongue to stay quiet. In the darkness, I reached for Sydney's face, cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. "She hurt you. Only once with her hands. But words were her preferred weapon." I wanted to drive to wherever Rebecca was staying and have a very direct conversation. Instead, I pulled Sydney closer, letting her head rest on my shoulder. "You're safe now," I whispered against her hair. "I know. That's what scares me." "Safety scares you?" "Happiness does. I keep waiting for it to be taken away." Around midnight, the emergency lighting dimmed to conserve power. We were left in velvet darkness, nothing but the sound of our breathing and distant building settling. Sydney had curled against my side, her head in my lap while I ran fingers through her soft hair. "Marina?" Her voice was drowsy. "Kiss me." I leaned down, finding her lips by touch alone. In the absolute darkness, every sensation intensified. The softness of her mouth, the way she sighed against my lips, the electric current that ran between us whenever we touched. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate. Sydney sat up, her hands framing my face as she kissed me like I was oxygen and she was drowning. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, the elevator felt charged with possibility. "I've never made love in an elevator," Sydney whispered. "Is that what we're doing?" "I hope so." What followed happened in tender darkness, hands rediscovering familiar territory made new by circumstance. Sydney's touch was worship, her whispered words of love a benediction that echoed in the small space. We moved together with careful urgency, bodies fitting like puzzle pieces finally finding their match. Every kiss tasted like promises, every caress like coming home. When the elevator finally jerked to life at 6 a.m., we were tangled together on the floor, Sydney's head on my chest, my jacket covering us both. The sudden movement and returning light made us scramble to reassemble our clothes. "Ladies, everyone okay in there?" A maintenance worker's voice boomed through the doors. "We're fine," I called back, helping Sydney straighten her rumpled sweater. The doors opened to reveal 2 concerned building employees and a small crowd of early morning commuters. We stumbled out, blinking in the harsh fluorescent lobby lighting. "Sorry about that," the maintenance guy said. "Power surge knocked out the elevator controls. You were stuck all night." "All night?" Sydney looked at me with mock surprise. Time flies. Outside on the sidewalk, morning sun painted everything golden. Sydney stopped walking and turned to face me, her green eyes bright with something I'd never seen before. "Last night changed things," she said. "Good things or complicated things?" "Both." She kissed me softly, right there on the busy downtown sidewalk, but mostly good. Walking to my truck, Sydney's hand warm in mine, I felt like we'd crossed some invisible threshold. The elevator had trapped us physically, but it had freed something emotionally. Whatever came next with Rebecca, with Sydney's returning memories, with our uncertain future, we'd face it together. We'd literally weathered the darkness and found light in each other. Everything else was just details. Rebecca Torres arrived in Omaha like a storm system nobody saw coming. I was reshaping aeronauts when Sydney burst into my workshop, face pale as winter sky. "She's here. Rebecca's here." My hand stilled on the arrow shaft. "Where?" "The coffee shop on Dodge Street." She saw my Instagram post about the archery lessons. Sydney's voice shook. "Says she flew from Portland to get me back." Through my workshop windows, December wind bent bare trees into submission. Rebecca had perfect timing, catching Sydney just as we'd found our rhythm, just as I'd started believing in our forever. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." Sydney sat heavily on my workbench stool. She looks exactly like my dreams. Dark hair, red lips, that smile I remember but can't trust. "Do you want to see her?" Sydney's green eyes searched mine for answers I couldn't give. Part of me needs closure. The other part is terrified she'll convince me this thing with you was just confusion. Am I confusion, Sydney? No. You're the clearest thing in my life. But doubt crept across her face like sunset shadows. Rebecca represented 4 years of history, of shared experiences Sydney couldn't access. How do you compete with a ghost made flesh? That afternoon, I watched from across the street as Sydney met Rebecca at Meridian Cafe. Through the window, I saw them embrace, Rebecca's arms lingering around Sydney's waist, familiar territory she'd mapped long before I existed. Rebecca was stunning. Polished in ways I'd never be. Wearing confidence like expensive perfume. She commanded attention without trying, the kind of woman who made others feel ordinary by comparison. Everything about her screamed successful, sophisticated, worthy of love. Sydney looked small beside her. Uncertain. Like she was remembering how to be someone else's other half instead of her own whole person. They talked for 2 hours. I knew because I sat in my truck watching like some stalker, counting minutes that stretched into eternities. When Rebecca leaned across the table to touch Sydney's hand, jealousy carved through my chest with surgical precision. Sydney didn't pull away. When they finally left together, walking toward Rebecca's rental car with the easy familiarity of former lovers, I couldn't breathe. My phone buzzed with a text from Sydney, going to look at old photos, need to understand who I was. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. Like I was some casual girlfriend instead of the woman she'd made love to in a broken elevator just days ago. I drove home through neighborhoods wrapped in Christmas lights, their cheerful glow mocking my dark mood. My apartment felt hollow without Sydney's scattered sticky notes and borrowed sweaters claiming space. For 3 days, silence. No calls, no texts, no Sydney appearing at my workshop with coffee and that dimpled smile. I threw myself into orders for the holiday rush, but every bow I crafted reminded me of the one I'd made for her, the one engraved with promises that now felt naive. Holly called Wednesday evening. "Heard Rebecca's in town," she said without preamble. "News travels fast. Sydney's been staying at the Marriott with her. They're going through photo albums, revisiting their whole relationship." Each word hit like an arrow finding its mark. "Thanks for the update. Marina, I like you. more than I ever liked Rebecca. But Sydney's making a choice based on recovered memories, and Rebecca's an expert at manipulation. Meaning? She's reminding Sydney of all their good times, while conveniently forgetting why Sydney ran away in the first place. Thursday brought Snow and Sydney to my workshop door. She looked exhausted, beautiful, and somehow smaller than when she'd left. Dark circles shadowed green eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. "I remember everything now," she said without greeting. My heart stopped. Everything? The fights, the control, why I left. Sydney stepped inside, closing the door against winter wind. But also the good times. Real love, Marina. 4 years of shared dreams. I set down my tools carefully, like they might shatter. And what does that mean for us? I don't know. The honesty hurt worse than lies would have. Sydney moved through my workshop like a stranger, touching bow projects that had once fascinated her with distracted fingers. Rebecca wants me to come back to Portland. Fresh start, she says. She's been in therapy dealing with her anger issues. Do you believe her? I want to. She was my first real love, Marina. We had plans. What about our plans? Finally, Sydney looked at me directly. Were they real, or were they just me running from the past? The question hung between us like smoke from a dying fire. I wanted to rage, to demand she choose me over history. Instead, I found myself stepping back, giving her space to breathe. Rebecca says I was different before the accident, more confident, decisive. With you, I've been this broken thing trying to piece herself together. You're not broken. Aren't I? I can't even trust my own memories. Rebecca appeared in my workshop doorway like she'd been summoned by our conversation. Designer coat, perfect makeup, absolute certainty in every movement. She looked around my space with barely concealed disdain. So this is where you've been hiding, she said to Sydney, then turned calculating eyes on me. You must be Marina. Rebecca. Her name tasted bitter. I need to thank you for taking care of Sydney while she recovered. But she's better now, ready to come home. The presumption in her voice made my hands clench. Sydney stood frozen between us, torn between competing futures. Sydney's home is wherever she chooses, I said evenly. Rebecca's smile was sharp as winter glass. Of course. And she's choosing Portland, with me, where she belongs. She moved to Sydney's side, claiming territory with practiced ease. Her hand settled on Sydney's lower back, possessive and familiar. Sydney didn't resist, but she didn't lean into the touch either. Sydney? I asked quietly. Is that what you want? The silence stretched until it became unbearable. When Sydney finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I need more time. Rebecca's confident facade cracked slightly. Time for what? To decide who I am, who I want to be. You know who you are. You're mine. The possessive claim sparked something protective in my chest. She belongs to herself. Rebecca's laugh was cold, spoken like someone who's never had real love. Sydney and I have history you can't compete with. I have her heart. Do you? Because she's been sharing my bed for 3 days. The words hit like physical blows. Sydney flinched but didn't deny them. My workshop suddenly felt too small, oxygen too thin. Get out, I said quietly. Excuse me? Both of you, get out of my workshop. Sydney's eyes filled with tears. Marina, please. Go figure out what you want, Sydney, but don't do it here. They left together, Rebecca's arm around Sydney's shoulders like a victory banner. I stood among my half-finished bows, surrounded by tools that could create beauty from raw wood but couldn't fix a breaking heart. Outside, snow kept falling, burying the world in white silence. The week without Sydney felt like archery practice with no target. I threw myself into preparing for the Nebraska Traditional Archery Championship, channeling heartbreak into precision. Every arrow I released carried fragments of rage, loss, hope I refused to acknowledge. Rebecca had won. Sydney was exploring their shared past, while I crafted bows for strangers who'd never appreciate the hours of soul I carved into each piece. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career shaping weapons designed to hit distant targets, but I couldn't keep the one person who mattered within range. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Sydney. I need time to process. This isn't about choosing between you two. Please understand. I stopped reading after the third day. Understanding wouldn't ease the ache in my chest every time I touched the bow I'd made for her. Thursday afternoon brought Holly to my workshop, carrying coffee and wearing an expression I couldn't read. She's miserable, Holly announced without preamble. Good. The word came out sharper than intended. Rebecca's been parading her around Omaha like a trophy, old restaurants, places they visited years ago, trying to recreate memories. I continued sanding a recurve grip, working out frustrations on innocent wood. Why are you telling me this? Because Sydney's performing, playing the role Rebecca expects instead of being herself. Maybe that's who she really is. Bullshit. Holly sat on my workbench stool. I've seen her with you. She glows, Marina. With Rebecca, she shrinks. I looked up from my work. Holly's usually sharp features had softened with something like concern. What do you want me to do about it? Fight for her. She made her choice. She made a confused choice based on manipulated memories. There's a difference. That evening, muscle memory guided me through competition preparation. Arrows flew in tight groupings, each shot finding its mark with mechanical precision. My body knew this routine, even when my heart felt shattered. I was retrieving arrows when Sydney appeared at the edge of my practice range. She looked smaller somehow, wearing clothes I didn't recognize. Elegant pieces that seemed to belong to someone else. Holly said, "You've been training." I pulled arrows from the target without turning around. Competition Saturday. The championship Rebecca mentioned. Sydney's voice carried uncertainty. She thinks we should fly back to Portland tomorrow. My hand stilled on an arrow shaft. What do you think? I think I don't know myself anymore. Finally, I faced her. Sydney's green eyes held confusion, and something that looked like desperation. The confident woman who'd learned archery in my workshop had been replaced by someone seeking permission to exist. When you're with her, do you feel like you? Sydney's laugh was hollow. I feel like someone I used to be. Someone who needed approval for every choice. Is that what you want? I want to remember who I was before I forgot everything. What if who you were before wasn't worth remembering? The question hung between us like an arrow at full draw. Sydney stepped closer, and I caught her familiar vanilla scent mixed with unfamiliar perfume. Rebecca's influence marking territory. She loves me, Sydney said quietly. So do I. She has history with me. I have a future with you. If you want it. Sydney's eyes filled with tears. I'm so confused, Marina. Every memory she shows me feels real, but when I'm with her, I feel like I'm suffocating. I reached out, cupping her face with hands that knew every curve, every expression. Then why are you doing this? Because maybe I owe it to who I used to be. You don't owe the past anything. We stood in fading daylight, surrounded by targets I'd hit perfectly while missing the one thing that mattered most. Sydney leaned into my touch like a flower seeking sun. I missed you, she whispered. I missed you too. When our lips met, it was like remembering how to breathe. The kiss tasted of tears and possibilities, of all the words we'd left unsaid during her week with Rebecca. Sydney pressed against me with desperate hunger, her hands tangling in my hair. I love you, she breathed against my mouth. But I'm scared I'm running from something I should face. What if you're running toward something worth having? Sydney pulled back, studying my face in the growing darkness. Snow began falling again, dusting her dark hair with white crystals. Can I watch you practice, like before? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We spent the next hour in comfortable rhythm, me shooting, Sydney observing with the intensity she once brought to everything in my world. When I hit dead center for the 20th consecutive time, she actually smiled. You're going to win Saturday. Does it matter? Everything you do matters to me. As I packed up equipment, Sydney helped with the familiar efficiency we developed over months of shared evenings. For brief moments it felt like we'd never been apart. Marina, Sydney's voice was small in the winter darkness. What would happen if I stayed? With Rebecca? With you. Hope fluttered in my chest like a caged bird testing its wings. We'd build something real, something chosen every day instead of inherited from the past. And if I go? You already know that answer. Sydney came closer, close enough that I could see snowflakes caught in her eyelashes. Show me what we'd build. This kiss was different. Tender where the others had been desperate, certain where they'd been confused. Sydney melted against me like she was coming home after a long, difficult journey. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. I have to tell Rebecca something. What will you tell her? That some things are worth more than history. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for archery competition. I arrived at the range early, needing solitude before facing other competitors. My equipment felt balanced, my form solid, but my heart remained focused on the conversation Sydney was having with Rebecca at their hotel. As I warmed up, releasing arrows with mechanical precision, I spotted a familiar figure approaching. Sydney walked across the snowy field wearing her own clothes again, carrying the bow I'd made for her. Thought I might practice alongside you, she said with a tentative smile. What about Rebecca? Rebecca's heading back to Portland, alone. Relief flooded through me so completely I nearly dropped my bow. Sydney stepped into the shooting position beside me, drawing the recurve I'd crafted specifically for her hands. Her first arrow hit the outer ring. Her second found the 8 ring. Her third arrow split the gold center. Bullseye, I said softly. Sydney turned to me, snow still falling around us, face radiant with decision made. Think I finally figured out what I'm aiming for. I kissed her there on the competition range, surrounded by targets and possibilities, tasting victory sweeter than any championship trophy could ever provide. Rebecca's departure left Sydney raw and fragile, like skin healing from a burn. We spent January rebuilding what doubt had nearly destroyed, taking things slower this time, more deliberately. Sydney moved her writing supplies back to my apartment gradually, first her laptop, then boxes of research books, finally her wall of sticky notes that transformed my sterile bedroom into something alive with possibility. I want us to plan something together, Sydney said one February morning over coffee. Something that's purely ours. I looked up from sketching bow designs. What do you have in mind? A business. Your craftsmanship. My storytelling skills. We could teach people archery while I run creative writing workshops. The idea took root immediately, spreading through my imagination like wildfire. Arrows and stories, I said. Perfect. Sydney grinned, that dimple appearing on her left cheek. I already found a space downtown, the old textile warehouse on Cumming Street. You've been researching this. For weeks. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I needed to make sure you'd want to build something permanent with me. Permanent. The word should have terrified me, but instead it felt like coming home. Sydney had chosen us. Not once in a moment of passion, but daily through small acts of commitment that spoke louder than grand gestures. By March, we'd signed the lease and begun renovations. The warehouse space was perfect. High ceilings for indoor archery ranges, natural light flooding through tall windows, enough room for both my workshop and Sydney's writing classroom. We worked side by side, painting walls and installing safety equipment, planning our future in primer and possibility. This will be the beginner's range, I explained to Sydney, gesturing toward the north wall. 20 yards maximum, foam targets. And over here, Sydney indicated the opposite corner. Comfortable chairs arranged in a circle for writing exercises. We'll call it the story circle. The blend of our worlds felt natural, like puzzle pieces designed to fit together. Sydney's creativity balanced my precision, while my grounding influenced her flights of imagination. We discovered we worked beautifully as a team. Our first major test came when Holly visited to discuss Sydney's delayed book contract. She found us installing target stands, both wearing paint-splattered work clothes and matching exhausted grins. You two look domestic, Holly observed. We're building an empire, Sydney replied, wiping wood stain from her hands. Will the empire interfere with your writing deadlines? I felt Sydney tense beside me. The pressure of unfinished work competed with her excitement about our shared venture. Before the accident, Holly had been Sydney's primary focus. Career advancement, publishing contracts, literary recognition. Now those ambitions seemed secondary to creating something meaningful with me. I'll meet my deadlines, Sydney said firmly. But I'm also building a life. Holly's expression softened slightly. Just don't lose yourself in someone else's dreams. These are my dreams too, Sydney replied, taking my paint-stained hand in hers. That evening, we decided to test our partnership beyond business planning. Sydney suggested a camping trip to Nebraska's Niobrara River, combining archery practice with her nature writing exercises. Just us, the wilderness, and whatever stories we discover, she said. We drove north on Highway 20, as spring painted the sandhills in green and gold. Sydney navigated while I drove, both of us singing badly to classic rock radio. The easy companionship felt like the fulfillment of promises we'd made without words. Our campsite sat beside cottonwood trees whose new leaves whispered secrets to the wind. I set up archery targets while Sydney established her outdoor writing station, folding chair, notebook, thermos of coffee that would stay warm until sunset. Watch this, I called, knocking an arrow. The shaft flew true, embedding dead center in the target 40 yards away. Sydney applauded with exaggerated enthusiasm. Show off. Now watch this. She opened her notebook and began writing with fierce concentration. The arrow knows its purpose from the moment it leaves the string. It doesn't question the archer's aim or doubt its own trajectory. It simply flies toward what calls it home. Is that about archery or about us? Sydney looked up with sparkling eyes. Both. That evening, sitting beside our campfire while stars emerged overhead, we talked about dreams that seemed possible now that we were dreaming them together. Sydney wanted to write a novel about second chances. I wanted to preserve traditional archery techniques for future generations. Together, we could do both. I love that we're building something from nothing, Sydney said, leaning against my shoulder. We're building it from everything. Your words, my craft, this crazy connection between us. Think it'll work? I think we'll make it work. Sydney turned in my arms, firelight dancing across her face. I'm scared of how much I love you. Good scared or bad scared? The kind of scared that means something matters. She kissed me softly, tasting like marshmallows and wood smoke. Promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll never let me run away again. Promise you won't want to. We made love then under Nebraska stars, our bodies fitting together with the natural rhythm we'd discovered in each other. Sydney's whispered words of love mixed with night sounds, owl calls and whined through grass, the eternal music of wild places. Every touch felt like claiming territory, marking this moment as ours forever. Later, as Sydney slept curled against my side, I stared up at constellations that had witnessed countless love stories. Some had burned bright and fast. Others had endured like ancient light still traveling toward Earth. I wanted us to be the enduring kind, steady, reliable, worth the long journey. The next morning brought Rebecca's unexpected phone call. Sydney stared at her ringing phone with something like panic. Answer it, I said gently. Face whatever she wants to say. Sydney accepted the call, putting it on speaker so I could hear Rebecca's voice crackling through static. Sydney? I'm calling from Portland. I wanted to apologize for how I handled things in Omaha. Okay, Sydney said carefully. I was desperate to get you back, but I realize now that wasn't fair to either of us. You've changed, and maybe that's not a bad thing. I held my breath, waiting for the catch. With Rebecca, there was always a catch. I hope you're happy with Marina. Really happy, not just running from us. I am happy, Sydney said with quiet certainty. Happier than I remember being. Then I'm glad. Take care of yourself. The call ended, leaving us in morning silence broken only by birdsong and river sounds. Sydney set down her phone and turned to me with tears in her eyes. She let me go, Sydney whispered. How do you feel about that? Free. Finally, completely free. I pulled her close, tasting salt tears and sweet relief on her lips. The past had officially released its claim on Sydney Rivera. Our future stretched ahead like an unmarked road, waiting for us to choose its direction together. Arrows and Stories officially opened on a crisp October morning exactly 1 year after Sydney and I first met at the Meridian Gallery. Cherry blossom petals from the tree outside our workshop windows drifted down like confetti, celebrating new beginnings built from old endings. I stood watching Sydney arrange chairs in her story circle, marveling at how naturally she'd grown into this role. Today she wore the flannel shirt I'd given her for Christmas, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had grown strong from months of archery practice. "First students arrive in 20 minutes, she called across our shared space. "You ready for this?" "Been ready my whole life." Our business model was unconventional but proven. Morning archery lessons with me, afternoon creative writing workshops with Sydney. The common thread was precision. Aiming arrows required the same focused intention as crafting perfect sentences. Both demanded patience, practice, and willingness to miss the target repeatedly before finding your mark. The first group consisted of 6 women ranging from college age to retirement, all drawn by our unique combination of physical and creative challenge. I watched them struggle with bow basics while Sydney observed, taking notes for character development. The synergy between our skills had developed into something beautiful. Remember, I coached a nervous brunette attempting her 3rd shot. The bow doesn't know if you doubt yourself. Neither does the target. Only you know, so stop knowing. The arrow flew true, hitting the outer ring. The woman's face lit up with surprise and pride. These moments never got old. Witnessing someone discover capabilities they'd never imagined possessing. During lunch break, Sydney cornered me in the workshop area, where I was fletching custom arrows for a hunting client. "Mrs. Patterson from the morning group wants private lessons," Sydney said. "And 3 women from my writing workshop are interested in archery." "Good problem to have." "Marina." Sydney's voice carried that tone I'd learned to recognize, the one that preceded important conversations. "I've been thinking about expansion." "Already?" "We've been open 6 hours." "Not business expansion. Personal expansion." Sydney perched on my workbench, dangling legs like a teenager. "I want us to buy a house together." My hands stilled on the arrow shaft I'd been working. "A house?" "With a big yard for outdoor ranges. Maybe room for a vegetable garden. Definitely space for a workshop larger than this rented corner." Sydney's green eyes sparkled with possibility. "A place that's ours from the foundation up." The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Commitment had always been my weakness, but with Sydney it felt like strength. She'd chosen us repeatedly over the past year, in small daily decisions and large life changes. Maybe it was time I chose us just as definitively. "Show me what you're thinking." Sydney pulled out her phone, scrolling to saved real estate listings. "This one's just outside town, 2 acres, farmhouse that needs work but has good bones." The photos showed a white clapboard house with wraparound porch and mature oak trees. It needed paint and probably new plumbing, but the setting was perfect, rural enough for archery practice, close enough for easy commutes to our downtown workshop. "When do we look at it?" I scheduled a showing for Sunday. "If it's terrible, we keep renting. If it's perfect," Sydney let the sentence trail off, hope naked in her voice. "If it's perfect, we make an offer." Sydney's smile could have powered the entire building. She slid off the workbench and into my arms, kissing me with enthusiasm that tasted like shared futures and paint sample cards. "I love you, Marina Williams." "I love you too, Sydney Rivera." The afternoon brought Holly's promised visit to evaluate our grand opening. She arrived wearing designer heels completely inappropriate for our concrete floors, carrying a leather portfolio that screamed New York publishing power. "Impressive setup," Holly admitted, surveying our combined workspace. "Very rustic." "That's the point," Sydney replied. "We're offering something you can't get in corporate environments." Holly observed Sydney teaching a poetry workshop while I coached advanced archery techniques at the indoor range. The integration was seamless. Writers drew inspiration from archery metaphors while archers found relaxation in creative exercises. "Your numbers look good," Holly said during our closing debrief. "But Sydney, your novel deadline is next month." "I'll make it." "Will you?" "Because this looks like a lovely distraction from serious writing." I felt Sydney tense beside me. The pressure of unfinished professional obligations still created friction between her old life and our new one. "Holly," Sydney said firmly, "this isn't distraction. This is inspiration. The novel's about second chances, about building something meaningful from broken pieces. I'm living that story every day. Just don't forget who you were before all this domestic bliss." I remember exactly who I was before. Someone afraid to commit fully to anything. Now I'm someone building a life worth committing to. That evening, after cleaning equipment and locking up, Sydney and I returned to the Meridian Gallery for their first anniversary celebration. The same painting that had brought us together still commanded the far wall, fragments of time with its scattered arrows and swirling words. "Look familiar?" Sydney asked, slipping her hand into mine. Like looking in a mirror. I studied the chaotic beauty we'd first connected over. Amazing how different it looks now. How so? Then it looked like destruction. Now it looks like construction. Pieces finding their proper places. We stood before the artwork that had changed both our lives, surrounded by opening night chatter but existing in our private bubble of shared memory. Sydney wore the blue dress she'd been wearing that first night, chosen deliberately for this anniversary pilgrimage. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. Anniversary gifts weren't part of the plan. "This isn't exactly a gift." I pulled out a custom-made arrow, its shaft carved from Heart of You, fletched with turkey feathers I'd personally selected. But instead of a hunting point or target tip, this arrow bore something that made Sydney gasp. A diamond ring, secured where the arrowhead should be. "Marina," Sydney whispered. "I figured if we're buying houses and building businesses together, we might as well make it official." My voice shook despite weeks of preparation. "Sydney Rivera, will you marry me?" Tears gathered in those green eyes I'd learned to read like my own heartbeat. Around us, gallery conversation faded to white noise. Even the painting seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. "Yes," Sydney breathed. "Obviously yes." She held still as I untied the ring from its arrow shaft, both of us laughing at the ridiculousness and rightness of this moment. The diamond caught gallery lights as I slid it onto her finger, marking territory we'd already claimed through daily choices to stay, to build, to love. "Perfect fit," I said. "Everything about us is a perfect fit." We kissed in front of the painting where we'd met, surrounded by fragments that had taught us how broken things could become beautiful again. Outside, October wind scattered leaves like confetti, like arrows finding their marks, like stories writing themselves toward happy endings we'd earned one choice at a time. The gallery owner approached with champagne and congratulations. Other visitors gathered, drawn by the obvious romance of the moment, but I only saw Sydney, wearing my ring and my heart, promising forever with eyes that had learned to aim true. Snow began falling outside the gallery windows, Nebraska winter arriving right on schedule. But inside our bubble of warmth and commitment, everything felt like spring, new growth, fresh possibilities. Love taking root deep enough to weather any storm. We danced poorly to gallery background music, laughing at our own lack of rhythm. But we'd found every rhythm that mattered, the push and pull of shared work, the give and take of compromise, the eternal beat of two hearts choosing each other daily. "Ready to go home, future Mrs. Williams?" I asked. "Ready to build something beautiful, future Mrs. Rivera Williams," Sydney replied. We walked into falling snow hand in hand, engagement arrow tucked safely in my jacket pocket, planning paint colors for farmhouse walls, and dreaming of targets we'd hit together for the rest of our lives. Behind us, fragments of time watched over an empty gallery, its scattered pieces having finally taught two women how to construct forever from whatever fragments life provides. Some stories end with arrows missing their marks. Ours ends with perfect aim, true flight, and the satisfying thud of love embedding exactly where it belongs.